Colleagues, very welcome to this session. My name is Andres Franco. I'm from the Public Partnerships Division. We're very happy to have many colleagues joining and to our panelists. I just wanted to open the webinar and introduce the topic of today's webinar. This is a joint initiative by UNESCO and UNICEF, and it's in collaboration with the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth, who, as you know, is our host today for the webinar. It aims to bring together governments and partners to discuss successes and challenges in delivering quality education, especially in Africa, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Education is not only a right, but a critical investment for human capital development to reap the demographic dividend in Africa. Despite substantial progress made in getting children into school in the last 20 years, the continent is still facing many challenges that have been exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we will hear from very esteemed speakers, from governments, on programs and innovations that they have in place, as well as from many of my colleagues from UNICEF and UNESCO on trends, challenges, and opportunities. To some degree, the COVID-19 pandemic has also provided an opportunity to reimagine education in Africa for safe, healthy, and inclusive schools, greater use of digital technologies, and teachers who are well-trained to bring these technologies to life to help children learn. In this broader context, South-South and triangular cooperation offers opportunities to countries to learn from each other in a spirit of learning and solidarity. It also increases the chances of having access to digital technology, to technical assistance, and to catalytic resources. UNICEF, UNESCO, and IPCIG are joining forces today, along with the governments of South Africa and South Korea, to discuss solutions that may be adapted to different countries facing similar challenges, and how, through South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation, we can scale up solutions in order to achieve quality education for all. This webinar is part of a series showcasing solutions and experiences in different areas of the SDG in the context of COVID-19. I think we will have a terrific discussion today, and I would like to hand over to my colleagues, Marta in particular, to continue to drive us through this exciting moment. Over to you, Marta.
Thank you, Andres. Thank you so much. So, Karin, next slide, please. So, Andres has already introduced himself. I am taking over with my, as I said, with my colleague, my counterpart in UNESCO. My name is Marta Santos. I am the program manager for South-South and Triangular Cooperation at UNICEF in headquarters in New York. So for our webinar today, we have a big number of presenters, and we are looking forward to these important presentations to look at the overview of education challenges and opportunities in Africa, but also to see some of the country experiences that will be presented by our esteemed guests. Next slide, please. During the webinar, please submit your questions in the chat box, and we will try to address them during the webinar or during the Q&A session. Next slide. For our first presentation, we will have Mr. Fermin Edouard Matoko from UNESCO. He will deliver for us an opening remarks. You have Mr. Matoko's bio on the screen. He served as the director of UNESCO's liaison office with the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, as well as UNESCO's representative in Ethiopia. So without further ado, I would like to hand over the floor to Mr. Matoko, please. Mr. Matoko, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, Marta. Mr. Matoko is just on his way now. So please bear with us for about 5 minutes. We just started our general conference, so he was stuck in a meeting with the Director General, but he'll be right here. Just give me 5 minutes.
Claire, if would you like us to proceed with the overview, and then we will have the opening remarks from Mr. Matoko after the two presentations on the overview, or would you like us to wait for him?
If you could just wait, I know he just is in his office. If you could just wait 5 minutes, I'll be right there, and he can give his opening remarks quickly.
No, so that would be fine. Thank you. So while we are waiting for Mr. Matoko, let me just take this opportunity to share with our participants that as Andres had mentioned, this is part of a series of webinars that we are sponsoring with different organizations, including the UN Office for South-South and Triangular Cooperation, to look at the potential of South-South and Triangular Cooperation in advancing the different areas of the 2030 Agenda. And in this last couple of, in the last years and the last 18 months, we have been focusing in particular on the impact of COVID-19 in delivering the 2030 Agenda. So for this particular webinar, we had, as Andres already mentioned, joined forces with UNESCO and our partner in the IPCIG in hosting this webinar on on reimagining education in Africa and what could be the potential role of South-South cooperation in supporting the recommendations moving forward. So we look forward to this very interesting discussion, and we will have Mr. Matoko shortly.
Yes, he's now connected online.
Thanks, Claire. And Mr. Matoko, you have the floor, please, when you are ready.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. And again, apologies for being a little bit late. Do you hear me, Claire? It's okay?
Yes, we can hear you very well. Perfect. Thank you, ADG.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Dear colleagues, dear participants, dear colleagues from UNICEF and from UNESCO, it's a great pleasure for me to be here and to welcome all of you to this webinar on reimagining education in Africa. UNESCO is pleased to be partnering with UNESCO and socialprotection.org on this webinar, which we see as the beginning of a longer-term partnership on South-South and triangular cooperation to support developing countries in recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. South-South and triangular cooperation is an important means of strengthening technical cooperation between developing countries, attracting funding from new and emerging donors, promoting capacity building and knowledge sharing to address development challenges. While the immediate health impact of COVID-19 is still evolving in Africa, with the pandemic affecting African countries differently, given varied strengths and vulnerabilities, the indirect consequences beyond health already bring a heavy toll. Lockdown measures and school closures resulted in large educational disruptions, which has interrupted the functioning of education system, reducing student learning and disrupting many vital functions that schools fulfill. In many localities, schools provide, as you know, meals for underprivileged learners and function as shelters from violence, providing safe spaces for socialization and interactions. School closures risk reversing the trend toward higher school participation and better learning outcomes observed over the past 2 decades in the continent. Dropout rates due to COVID-19 threaten to increase already high levels of out-of-school children across the region. Dear colleagues, UNESCO's preliminary estimates show that in 2021, 4.3 million learners from pre-primary to tertiary education will face the risk of dropping out or not enrolling at all due to economic shocks brought by the COVID. Learners may not return to classroom upon reopening, as they may need to enter the labor market due to family needs and because of early pregnancy, care, and domestic responsibilities, among other causes. Bold action is needed from everywhere and from everybody, and especially from the international community. This calls for leveraging Africa's innovation and creativity potential, including through the education initiatives designed and implemented during the crisis. Education must play a key role in the continent's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. This is also the ambitious program of the African Union and of the African governments in launching the continental strategy on education for Africa. UNESCO's Futures of Education reports, to be launched this month at UNESCO, provides recommendations on how to transform education system and will inform the preparation of the SDGs Summit on Transforming Education in 2022, which, as you know, is part of the common agenda. I look forward to hearing more from our speakers today. We look forward to hearing more from our speakers today on how we can strengthen multi-stakeholder partnership, transfer solution, and increase access to technical cooperation through South-South and triangular cooperation. I thank you for your attention and wish all of you a very fruitful debate. Thank you again for inviting UNESCO. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Matoko, and I hope that you could stay with us throughout the webinar, and also we look forward to your support to this initiative of leveraging South-South and triangular cooperation for reimagining education in Africa. So for the first segment of our webinar today, we have two esteemed speakers from UNESCO and from UNICEF to give us the lay of the land. Our colleagues will highlight trends, issues, and challenges, but also opportunities in the education sector in countries in Africa, taking into consideration the COVID-19 context. For our first speaker, we have Mr. Gwang-Chol Chang. If we can have the slide on Mr. Chang. Mr. Gwang-Chol Chang is the chief of the education policy section at UNESCO. And before that, he had worked extensively in different positions within UNESCO, in positions such as the Chief of Education section at the regional office in Dakar, and before that, a senior program specialist at the Asia Pacific Regional Bureau for Education. Before, he had also worked in different areas in the education sector, in particular, education policy analysis, planning, and management. Before joining UNESCO, Mr. Chang was working with the Ministry of Education in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Mr. Chang, we're very happy that you could join us today. We look forward to your presentation, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much for inviting UNESCO to share some findings on the challenges and the opportunities on reimagining education in Africa. So I'd like to share some of the slides. You can go to the next one. And we know that COVID-19 has had dramatic impacts on all parts of the world. In the case of Africa, the health impact of COVID has been relatively less severe than other regions, with a fewer share of reported cases and related death. However, the pandemic brought large socioeconomic impacts in Africa, with a contraction of 2% GDP in 2020, and compared with the annual growth by more than 3% of the previous 3 years. When it comes to education, Africa has been severely affected as well with the prolonged school closures and larger educational disruption. You can see here on this slide the information on school closure from 2020 to 2021 in Africa. For instance, a third of countries in Eastern and Southern Africa have been closed their schools for more than 6 weeks. Such school closures risk reversing the trend towards increasing school participation over the past 2 decades in the continent, and they can exacerbate already existing challenges and inequalities. Next. So in July 2020, UNESCO estimated that the pandemic would cause an increase of 24 million learners at risk of dropping out of school worldwide. I think you have to go to the next slide. So to corroborate this trend, according to the data just released by UIS, UNESCO Institute of Statistics, it is estimated that out-of-school children might have actually increased by an additional 3.5 million in a year time, bringing the total number of out-of-school children to almost 260 million. This is only the provisional estimation, as it will take time to understand the real picture of the pandemic's impact on education. Next slide, which is more specifically on Africa. According to UNESCO's preliminary estimate, in 2021, 4.3 million learners in Africa will face the risk of dropping out. You can see the magnitude of the at-risk students by subregion, which looks more severe in Eastern, Central, and Western Africa regions. Moreover, as in other world regions, school disengagement follows gender patterns that disadvantages female learners. This is expected to be particularly true in Eastern, Central, and Western Africa regions, where there are more girls than boys at risk of dropping out, while in Southern and Northern Africa regions, more boys than girls may be at risk. Therefore, to tackle this problem, gender-sensitive policies and programs will be needed to ensure retention and re-enrollment both for boys and girls. And next slide. And COVID-19 highlighted the urgent need to rethink ongoing efforts to improve African education systems and to strengthen the resilience of education services, including integration of digital technologies. In the face of COVID-19, many countries try to deploy remote teaching and learning platforms. However, the digital divide has been a massive barrier to this effort. Only 34% of African households have access to internet, and 89% of learners cannot access a computer at home. Therefore, despite the efforts of education ministries to develop their own digital learning platforms, it became clear that they were not widely used. Many African governments responded to this quickly by launching educational broadcasts via TV, radio, or other channels to deploy hybrid methods to support learning continuity. This was the case of about 50% of African countries, which use hybrid methods combining TV, radio, and online, including wide use of mobile phones and apps to ensure learning continuity. Hybrid education is here to stay, and the experience and the lessons learned from the current crisis should be a key part of future efforts to expand access to education and improve learning quality. The strategy should address the whole ecosystem, including connectivity, content pedagogy, access to devices, and teaching, management, and maintenance capacity. The strategy should involve collaboration between public, private, and civil society partners to address key bottlenecks in building resilience and transforming education. We already have examples of this both from the international community and the private sector partnerships. And for example, UNESCO launched the Global Education Coalition in March 2020 to support learning continuity in member states. The JEC has planned and completed nearly 100 or so projects to support learning continuity and recovery. Next. With all this in mind, there are important factors for consideration moving forward. Following the Africa Day Forum in May this year, some suggestions for digitization has been proposed, such as create policy to ensure internet access in all schools, invest in Wi-Fi capable devices for student and teacher use, for rural settings, preload these devices with learning materials that cover the curriculum for an entire year. And the fourth, train and retrain teachers using modern digital tools, and ensure education technology and curriculum experts are included in administrative and teaching staff. All these recommendations are valuably important, but they are not easy. Still moving ahead, next slide. Education recovery and transformation need investment. UNESCO has been monitoring government fiscal responses to the pandemic. Estimate shows that education was not a priority in much of the world's fiscal stimulus. Although a total of 16 trillion US dollars were invested in stimulus package worldwide, less than 470 billion was invested in education, which is merely a mere 3% of this total stimulus. 97% of stimulus, education stimulus occurred in high-income countries. This means that less than 3% of this 470 billion was spent in low-income countries. So this global imbalance in investment to education and training may risk worsening the disparities in education and learning outcomes that existed across countries prior to COVID-19 pandemic. I just wonder, Martha, how much time I have?
2 minutes.
Okay, good. I'm finishing. So you can find in this slide some key findings of UNESCO surveys on stimulus packages worldwide and by region. Next, in order for education to play a key role in the continent's recovery from COVID-19 pandemic, the following suggestions may put forward. In the short and medium term, we need to bring learners back to schools, designing, implementing school reopening strategies that include comprehensive services. And second, organize catch-up programs, designing and implementing remedial learning at different levels of education. Third, empower teachers, providing support for remedial learning and hybrid teaching approaches. Fourth, support education demand, prioritizing and targeting disadvantaged families and children. And fifth, implement upskilling and reskilling programs for youth and adults, considering that the post-COVID era will require economic transformation and different skill sets. And last but not least, protect education expenditure on education, making investment in education a priority. Last slide. In the long term, priorities remain unchanged, ensuring that all children, youth, their families receive access to education and learning opportunities, starting strong with early childhood. More domestic resources to education are needed, making public expenditure on education a priority, and using this investment smartly and more effectively to harness the potential of the youth demographic dividend. And then there is need to invest more in infrastructure, especially for hybrid education, including the electrification of schools, the digital equipment, and their connectivity. And digital transformation is important, leveraging technology for advancing quality and equity of education and lifelong learning opportunities for us. And last but not least, again, equity for all. In the face of budget constraints, there is need to prioritize more and more, especially for girls and marginalized children who stand to lose the most from this crisis. Thank you very much for your attention. Over to you.
Many thanks, Mr. Chang, and thank you for you're right on time. Thank you for the information that you shared. Data is very, very important, definitely, in moving forward, but also the recommendations which we are looking into. For our next speaker, also providing the overview on the education issues and challenges in Africa, we have my colleague from UNICEF, Mr. Nicolas Reuge. Nicolas is a senior advisor at in the education section in UNICEF headquarters. He's the team leader for the sector planning, innovation, data, and evidence for results teams. Mr. Reuge has 25 years of experience in statistics, planning, and the education sector analysis and development, which he had acquired mostly working in Africa. Nicolas joined UNICEF in 2009 as Chief Education in our office in Mauritania, and subsequently spent 8 years in UNICEF in our regional office in West and Central Africa, working as a regional education specialist, and then subsequently promoted to the senior position of regional education advisor. Before joining UNICEF, Mr. Reuge worked with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France, and also with UNESCO, the World Bank, and as an independent consultant in different functions, working in the areas of education policy and education economy. Nicolas, we are looking forward to your presentation. We are happy that you are able to join us in this context also of the South-South and Triangular Cooperation, and we look forward to your presentation. Over to you, please.
Really my pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to complement, by the way, what the previous speaker, my colleague Gwang-Chol Chang, was saying. And I'm going to give a snapshot presentation of one report we UNICEF jointly produced with the Africa Union for the United Nations General Assembly this year, which tried to see what are the challenges, what was the response during the COVID-19 crisis of education system in Africa, and few recommendations that are in line with the continental education strategy of the Africa Union. So very, very important collaboration we have, and very dynamic as well, because we are really looking forward to also work in the view of the Africa Union Summit, in particular with IAE people, the Dakar, the UNESCO Institute based in Dakar. So can we go next slide, please? So I will not go back to the introduction of Andres, but I mean, just mentioning that this is a time to reap the benefit of a demographic dividend. Africa has a huge demographic pressure. Here are the statistics, and we estimate that by 2050, 40% of the young people population will be in Africa. So putting a lot of pressure on social services, of course, but also giving an opportunity to really skill the future of education, and then to really benefit from this window of opportunity to transform the demographic burden into a real demographic dividend for the future socioeconomic progress of the continent. Can we go next, please? So we usually say, put the emphasis on the constraints, but we also have to recognize the progress made since 2000, and those are there here on the screen, and instead of just mentioning those global statistics, I would say that in some countries, we saw, particularly in the Sahel region, some countries being able to multiply by 2 or 3 the completion rate of primary education, which was really a huge challenge considering the huge demographic pressure in those countries. But today, on average on the continent, the completion rate in primary education is around 65–66%. So between 6 and 7 kids out of 10 complete primary education, which represents a huge progress. And of course, slightly lower completion rate in lower secondary, and still, 1 in 4 adolescents completing secondary education. So there are still some challenges at this level. Can we go next, please? Of course, complementing what my colleague GC was saying before, I would add that the response of education during the COVID-19 crisis could be mentioned as exemplary in some African countries, in particular in the view of prioritizing the reopening of school. And we saw many countries continuing face-to-face schooling with adequate safety measures and preventive measures in order to prevent the spread of the disease in school. We saw also some countries engaging quickly in the rollout of connectivity and digital learning. We saw a lot of experience of remote digital learning and remote broadcast learning that had been already implemented in previous pandemic or epidemic. I'm thinking about the pandemic, Ebola outbreak in 2014, for instance. But really a lot of really great experience that we should probably build on in order to support the Africa to benefit from this demographic dividend. Can we go next, please? Then, I mean, still, although we had many progresses, we still have many challenges. I will not really come back on those. Just to say that if we reduce the burden of out-of-school children during the last 2 decades, still 105 million children of primary and secondary school age are out of school, this. If we combine that to the previous challenge, which is a demographic challenge, mentioning that in some countries we should have a huge increase of the demography of young children, then we really need to pay attention to those now in order to be able to address the education need of the prospective population. Next, please. And then, yeah, beyond the access component. Next, please. Next slide. Beyond the access component, there is the statistics from the World Bank, which is about the learning poverty. Before the crisis, at global level, we were estimating that 53% of the children age of 10 couldn't read a simple sentence, and this statistic will be up to 9 in 10 children in sub-Saharan Africa. So here is a really huge challenge here for the continent, considering also what happened during the crisis. And just to say that a child from the richest household in Africa is 8 times more likely to complete primary education than a child from the poorest household, and we have this statistic that is reaching 1 to 12 for secondary education. Can we go next, please? Of course, as my colleague was saying, still the limitation of the education outcome find there one of the root causes in the teachers issue. So we have a need of 17 million teachers to achieve universal primary and secondary education, but beyond the number of teachers, we should think about the number of trained teachers. And the estimate that we'll find in the report is that on average, from early childhood education up to secondary education, 80% of teachers are qualified teachers, while we should expect that all teachers should be qualified. So let me move to the recommendation of the report. I see Marta appearing on my screen, so I think it's time. So the recommendations are really in line with what GC was presenting before. So first of all, there is a need to really address the issue of school inclusion with special attention to groups that drop out. So meaning that enhancing education sector analysis in order to better understand and to contextualize the root causes of exclusion. Focus on foundational learning from the early stage raised learning level. We saw this learning poverty statistic, the fact that kids of age of 10 cannot read a simple sentence, for instance. We saw that despite a huge success during the education response during the COVID crisis, still there is a lack of connectivity, lack of digital resources. So the ambition is really to put the emphasis on that, not to substitute to the current education service delivery, but to complement it in order to raise the level of quality, in particular, support teachers on that, and also support learners' holistic needs. And we all know that the school is not a platform of education only, but is generally an entry point for other sectors to support kids. So really explore then and support nutrition, health, WASH, mental health, psychosocial safety. Next, please. Next slide and final slide. Invest in teacher for sure. So next slide. No, previous. Invest in teacher, which is in order to raise the percentage of qualified teacher in addition to the increased number of teachers. Secure funding, develop efficient and innovative funding mechanism, and we are thinking about new funding, additional funding, but also better use of funding. There is an additional stat that I could refer to, is that in some countries, the poorest kids receive 10 times less public funding than the richest, which is what we call the benefit incidence analysis. Invest in more developing a resilient education system, which would avoid education to be disrupted, or to be able to mitigate the impact of any kind of crisis. So invest in risk analysis within the education sector analysis exercise, which are preliminary to the education sector planning processes. And lastly, once again in line with what Gwang-Chol Chang was saying, is really we have a need for data. Planning means data, and we need better data, better quality of data, better way to use data. So there is definitely a need to really address the issue of HR funding, effective production, dissemination, and use of the data in education at national and regional level. And I think I am done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicolas, and you are right on time. And thank you for highlighting the success and the progress, because in a South-South cooperation context, one of the things that countries would like to do is to really learn from the solutions and good practices from other countries, and how this can be scaled up. Countries believe that no matter what the level of development of a country, they have something to share and something to learn from each other. So thank you for that. And thank you to you and Gwang-Chol for giving the lay of the land and the overview of the situation of education in Africa. The next segment of our webinar, we will have 3 country presentations where our speakers will reflect on how these issues and challenges at the regional and continental level are reflected at the country level. So for our first presentation on that, we have a very esteemed speaker with a very long experience in the area of human resource development in the education sector. We have Mr. Enoch Rabotapi, who is the Chief Director in the Department of Basic Education in South Africa. Mr. Rabotapi is responsible for the National Institute for Curriculum and Professional Development unit since 2019, and he had joined the department in 2005 as Deputy Chief Education Specialist, responsible for teacher conditions of service. Before that, he was the Director for Education Performance Management and Whole School Evaluation, and also working as Chief Director prior to that position, responsible for the area of human resource, education, human resources development. Mr. Rabotapi has a very extensive experience in education system development, and one of his important achievements was in leading the establishment of the National Institute of Continuing Professional Development in the country. So, Mr. Rabotapi, we look forward to your presentation. We are also very happy to know that you have over 10 years of experience directly in the learning and teaching process as a high school teacher and a college lecturer. So over to you, Mr. Rabotapi.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And also thank you for the opportunity to present the experiences of South Africa in relation to how we have been able to manage the COVID-19 situation. Next slide, please. Next slide. Now, in terms of background and context, South Africa, as we may all know, was one of the countries that was worst affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, which has led, of course, to severe disruptions in schooling. And as a result, we experienced the widespread learning losses. And the learning losses have manifested themselves in various forms. For an example, we have experienced the high school dropout that have been rising. And then we are also experiencing psychosocial challenges for both teachers as well as learners. But there's also a formal loss of curriculum learning. And our research is actually showing that learners have not been learning optimally. So even those measures that we have put in place that enabled learners to learn from home, or the system of rotation that we introduced, in both those measures, learners continued to experience learning losses quite significantly. We have had to also trim the curriculum so that we could be able to cover key topics within the available time in all the grades, with the exception, of course, of the exit grade, which in our case is grade 12. And we also experienced challenges in the sense that we expected parents to provide support to learners as part of home-based learning. But of course, this had its own challenges. And of course, teachers also experienced challenges with ensuring continuity of learning. Next slide. So what are some of the problems that we experienced as a country? Firstly, we found that there were a wide range systemic learning challenges across the country. Just to indicate that before the COVID-19 pandemic, our system did have its own limitations in terms of unequal learning from rural to urban and all of that. So the COVID-19 pandemic exacerbated those unequal learning losses. The second key challenge, of course, is our capacity constraints, whereby it became clear that in terms of infrastructure, we did not have enough classrooms to accommodate, for an example, social distancing that would accommodate all learners. Hence, we had to resort to a rotational system of learning because our schools simply did not have the capacity to accommodate all the learners. In terms of technology, there were disparities, of course, in terms of technology, in the sense that, firstly, the capacity of our teachers to engage in technology-based system of learning was lacking. So that became a challenge. The issue around availability of devices was also unequal across the country. Problems of connectivity, where there were serious problems, of course, mainly in the rural areas, and also issues around availability of data and the data costs. So we also experience a lot of digital inequality as a result of the things that I have mentioned. Next slide. Now, what was our response as a system to the challenges that we faced? Firstly, one of the things that we did when schools were reopened was that we trimmed the curricula for the lower grades so that we could cover what was essential within the available time. Secondly, we looked at extending the school calendar so that we could use some of the additional time to cover some of the topics that we could not cover in the time that was available. Thirdly, we deferred some of the mid-year examinations, and this was largely to create additional time to catch up on teaching and learning. Fourthly, we implemented what we call a remote and digital learning program. And this remote and digital learning program was where we used a host of multiple platforms where we could also deliver lessons in the light that not all learners and teachers were able to be at school at the same time. And also to indicate that one of the things that we are doing now as a country is to send, we've appointed over 300,000 young people that we have deployed in schools to provide additional support to teachers with different skills. Some of the youth are skilled in ICT, and some of the youth are supporting teachers in the administration. And this deployment is meant to make sure that teachers can focus on covering learning losses, and so that their time is not taken up by other things like administration and others. Next slide. So in terms of our response, what is it exactly that we wanted to achieve with the response that we had as a department? Firstly, our main objective was to ensure that there was equitable continuity of learning through our remote and digital learning program. And how we wanted to achieve that, firstly, was to complement or supplement the support that we provided to learners, teachers, as well as the parents. Secondly, we wanted to build on the existing remote learning networks throughout South Africa. We do acknowledge that before COVID, there were already measures that were in place in terms of remote and digital learning. So we had to ensure that we expand those to cover those areas where they were not there. We had to also wanted to build the evidence through proper monitoring and evaluation with a view to establish if what we were doing was delivering the required results. And fourthly, we had to provide a curriculum learning, care and support in teaching and learning, so that through resources and various other means, we could support all sectors of our system, including learners with special educational needs. Next slide. Now, this is just a reflection of our remote and digital learning design. It rested on those critical levers. Firstly, we wanted to make sure that we grew the national network on remote and digital learning. We acknowledge that it was not only government that was going to be able to do this, but we had to rely on private sector and other partners. Secondly, we had to make sure that we source and create new content that could be delivered through these different platforms that included radio, television, online learning and other platforms. We had to adopt multiple platforms to ensure that learners, teachers, and parents can make use of different platforms. We had to promote curriculum learning as well as care and support for teachers and learners. We had to make sure that we put together a very strong advocacy strategy in order to communicate the interventions and to communicate the various platforms where learners could access some of the learning content and the materials. And we had to put in place, of course, a monitoring and evaluation strategy so that as we were implementing these interventions, we could also learn some lessons in order for us to improve our practice. Next slide. And what has been some of the key achievements with the measures that we put in place? Firstly, we were able to make sure that our network was expanded. We were able to ensure that we covered 600,000 matriculants, 600,000 grade 11 learners through psychosocial support. And some of the key outcomes that we were able to achieve are reflected on that slide. Next slide. See that I'm losing time.
Yes, just to mention that we have 2 more minutes left.
Okay. So this slide is some of the slides that emanated from our monitoring and evaluation strategy, where we give some of the key statistics in terms of what were our findings regarding the use of television and what were our findings around communication. Next slide. And these are some of the observations that we experienced through our learning support program that we put in place. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of regional collaboration, as a country, we hosted a number of seminars with, webinars with some of our neighbors, countries such as Rwanda, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, to mention a few. And the key purpose of these webinars was to share practices and to share information and experiences about how they have responded to the situation. And also the UNESCO teacher task force, the knowledge sharing platform that they have established, which also enables us to share resources and to share materials that we use. So those are some of the interventions, of course, that we used as part of regional collaboration. Next slide. And some of the recommendations, of course, is that firstly, I think it's important for countries to collect data in terms of the intervention so that it could assist when we actually exchange experiences and knowledge, and that some of that information should be shared through that knowledge sharing platform. Resourcing by countries is important to maximize connectivity, electrification, and provision of resources, provision of gadgets to teachers and learners, as well as ensuring access to affordable data so that they can access the online platforms. We need to invest in capacity building for both teachers and learners, and all of this require financial and technical support by the ministry, but not only the ministry, as well as our partners through the private sector, UNICEF, international agencies, and our NGOs. It's important to all hold hands together. Next slide. Thank you very much. I didn't time my time correctly, so I had to rush in the latter slides, but thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rabotapi. That was a very interesting presentation, especially what you were saying about South Africa's remote digital learning program, and also in terms of how you're mobilizing young people to help enhance the digital skills of teachers, which I thought was a very innovative mechanism, as well as the South-South cooperation webinars that you mentioned with countries in the region to share best practices. Thank you very much for that. So with that, I'd like to now turn it over to my two colleagues. We have Idalina Rodrigues and David Ruscelli. They are from our UNESCO Multisectoral Regional Office in West Africa. And they will be giving a brief presentation, no more than 15 minutes, so we can try to keep to time, about UNESCO's Imagine École initiative, which is being led in a number of countries. So now I'd like to just present Miss Idalina Rodrigues. She is currently a consultant for the regional coordination of the Imagine École initiative at UNESCO. And she's also working on knowledge management of the World Bank's SIS project. As you can see, she's held a number of management positions in digital and innovative training. So it's great to have her on board. I won't read through the whole bio since you have it on the screen, but rather I'll present also David Ruscelli, also from our multisectoral regional office in Dakar. He's an education project officer at UNESCO Dakar, responsible for strengthening teachers' training and management in the G5 Sahel countries. And he's part of the team also working to implement the Imagine École initiative, which is being undertaken with education ministries of 11 countries in West and Central Africa. So without further ado, I will give it over. I don't know who wants to start first, but I'll give it over to my two colleagues. David, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Claire. Yeah, I will start and then pass on to Idalina for a few slides. So thank you very much for giving us time to present the Imagine École initiative. Just for non-French speakers, to say that Imagine École in English literally translates as Imagine School. I guess some of you already got it, but just to be clear. This initiative has its roots in the education sector response to the COVID-19 pandemic. That as we have seen in the previous presentation, disrupted the provision of education services in the whole African continent as elsewhere in the world. Part of this initiative, because as you will see in the next slide, Imagine École is a complex series of action and approaches to improve education quality through South-South cooperation. So part of this initiative, as I was saying, responds directly to a request of education ministers that during the CONFEMEN ministerial meeting of 2020, CONFEMEN is the body bringing together education ministries of French-speaking countries. So during this meeting in 2020, the education ministers from West and Central African countries, they called for a solution to ensure continuity of learning and strengthen resilience of education system. This idea was then incorporated into a wider project in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This project that is still today funded by the Global Partnership for Education is implemented by a consortium of agencies under the umbrella of the Global Education Coalition. The three agencies are UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank, with UNESCO leading on the component of this regional education platform for French-speaking countries in West and Central Africa. So I will now give the floor to Idalina, my colleague Idalina, that will guide us through the functionalities and key features of the Imagine École regional platform, and I will then be back to speak about some of the opportunities of improving education through South-South cooperation in the framework of this initiative.
Thank you, Davide, but I can't put my video. if the animator can give me the, okay. Next slide, please. Okay, Imagine École is, thank you, Davide. Imagine École is a regional platform that offers quality educational resources and a space for sharing resources between the 10 national platforms using two main features. A space to access resources without authentication for students and teachers, direct use of modules on universal subjects such as French, mathematics, biology, and chemistry. A designer space for teachers who will digitize their courses, creation of grain, modules and courses. The idea is to have a platform with local content. Next. Here we have an idea of the current student-teacher interface. And next, interface of the creator. Okay, thank you. Next. In additional to the platform, the Imagine École initiative is also a regional capacity building program on digital education supported by our technical partner Réseau Canopé. A regional capacity building program on the pedagogical and didactic aspects of the different subject areas covered by the Imagine École platform, supported by France Éducation Internationale, to develop the network of competent teachers. The strategy adopted is a cascade training at the level of the 10 countries, which are Benin, Burkina Faso, Chad, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Guinea, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo. Next, please. Thank you. The main action implemented to address the challenges of the countries, surveys of teachers' ICT skills have been used to create training plans that take into account the specific needs to teachers in each country. Situation analysis on the digitalization of teaching and learning, training in digital education, training in indexing selected resources from the regional platform to the national one, training in the design and development of educational resources using the Imagine École platform. Webinars for knowledge sharing with KICS Africa 21 project and basics of scripting for education with FEI. Thank you. Slide. The main achievement of Imagine École. We have one regional platform, 10 national platforms, which are in reality entry portals by country, 102 teacher trainer trained, 145 virtual workshops, 200 scenario design around the country's curricula, 250 laptops awarded to the best developer of digital education content. For the ongoing activities, we have actually 10,000 teachers trained in Cascade in the different countries. 6 million students know how about e-learning platforms and can access to resources. 60,000 printed educational resources for area without connectivity, principally in 3 countries, Mali, Chad, and Niger. A creator provides a framework for the creation of country-specific digital content that is shared at the regional level. And to finish, communication action at all levels. We have communication with the ministry, communication with the general public, like RFI, and communication directly in schools. Thank you. And now I give back the floor to Davide.
Thank you, Idalina. Just to have a quick look at some of the interesting experiences that gave the opportunity to countries to exchange and cooperate on specific teaching and learning topics. In the framework of this initiative, we can talk about the training of trainers. As Idalina mentioned it, a series of trainings have been implemented, and some of these trainings allow national teams to collaborate, share challenges, look at common solutions, and tackle different complex situations together. So this training were implemented together with our technical partner, Reuge, and they targeted teams of 8 to 15 national training of trainers, depending on the context of the country. Another interesting experience is the study on the learning ecosystem, because as I was saying, Reimagining Education is much more than just a platform. The platform is one of the tools, but there are different components that look at how really transform the concept of schools, the concept of education, and support countries in finding common solutions and adapt them to their national context. Then we have also worked with other different existing platforms and projects to develop linkages. This has been indeed one of the challenges, and something to work on going further. And finally, through this initiative here in the Dakar office, we had the opportunity to coordinate and work with other partners on come together, bring with a common position towards national ministries in relation to the issue of distance learning. Next slide, please. Concerning the South-Southern Triangular cooperation, indeed, this is one of the key features of this initiative. As you may have understood by now, the interesting aspect of the platform is the opportunity for countries, for teachers, for users and educators to develop their own content, to share the content among countries, and to share other educational resources, and to best adapt and learn from other experiences. So indeed, this is the way we're going to continue working in the future and bringing together the countries. And as we've seen, probably Claire said in the introduction, we talked about 11 countries, even if, as you've seen in the presentation, we only mentioned 10 of them. This is because Mauritania is an additional country that is now joining the initiative. So the idea is really to increase this cooperation, building bridges across different education systems around the issue of educational resources and teaching and learning. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide to look at some of the, let's say, internal recommendation or way forward, because the project is still ongoing. Indeed, the participation in the Reimagining Education initiative allowed countries to regularly exchange about topics concerning distance education, learn about common and specific challenges, and think about common solution. But this also gave us the opportunity to develop interesting solutions such as this Creaton, this sort of challenge of teachers to bring teachers together and give them the opportunity to develop innovative, interesting education content. Another interesting opportunity for us through the Reimagining Education initiative is the development of a reference document to support educational transformation in Africa. This is an ongoing initiative with the France Education International, and we are going to develop this this document together with the national education ministers, the focal points based on the experience coming from the Reimagining Education. Another interesting point is the opportunity to develop synergies with the existing UNESCO project, such as I will just mention them in order to keep the time. But there is the KPD program that is already building on South-South cooperation to develop capacity, strengthen capacity at the national level of participating member states. Here at the Dakar office, we have the G5 Sahel, strengthening teaching the G5 Sahel project that looks at bringing together the countries that are part of the G5 Sahel around the issue of human development and teacher management and training. There are other ongoing Pan-African initiatives concerning technical and vocational education, and there is the issue of ICT in education. But we're not only looking to internally at UNESCO project, as we said, we've worked massively with partners at regional and national level, and recently we have been exchanging with our partners in UNICEF concerning the opportunity to develop linkages between the Reimagining Education platform and the initiative, of course, and their learning passport platform that is more anchored at national level, and particularly in the context of Guinea, Mali, and Niger. I see that Claire is there to remind me that we exhausted our time, and this was all for the presentation, and I thank you very much. And we are there to answer to any question that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David and Idalina. That was a very interesting presentation. I noted down the 10,000 teachers trained and 6 million students now have access to the digital platforms. I was also particularly interested in the point that you raised about working together with the national education partners to develop a common plan on distance learning, which I think is quite interesting in terms of South-South cooperation, and then also the need to build synergies, not only with UNESCO's ongoing South-South cooperation programs in ICT, technical vocational education and training, but also in terms of other initiatives that are ongoing. So with that, I'd like to present our next speaker. We have Ms. Najoua, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Bada. She's from the KOICA, Morocco, and she's working as project manager at the KOICA Morocco office. And she will be here today to discuss the work that she's doing on South-South and triangular cooperation on technical vocational education and training. Here we have her bio that you can see here. So now I would like to, as we're running a bit out of time, to give Najoua the floor. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're all doing good. I am Najoua Bada, working as project and human resources manager at the KOICA Morocco office. Thank you for inviting KOICA to this webinar. Our office, represented by the country director, Mr. Gwang-Chol, is very proud and glad to take part in this webinar alongside worldwide stakeholders to contribute in the development of the education sector for the benefit of the African continent. Next slide, please. Through this presentation today, I will be shedding lights on the successful experience of the Republic of Korea in terms of cooperating with the Kingdom of Morocco in the field of vocational training, which has become one of the key interests of the Kingdom. So the presentation will tackle down the Korea-Morocco South-South cooperation from different angles. Next slide, please. So the priority sectors of the KOICA Morocco office in terms of vocational training is the automobile field as well as the energy field. South-South and triangular cooperation plays a crucial role in fostering regional integration and knowledge sharing. And in this context, the triangular cooperation in vocational training among Morocco, Republic of Korea, and 4 African countries involved Tunisia, Cameroon, Senegal, Ivory Coast, for providing training courses for government officials and technical institutions was launched by the KOICA Morocco office. So this triangular cooperation project builds on the success of a previous project of KOICA, the project for the establishment of the Advanced Automobile Training Institute in Casablanca, the IFMIAC, for a budget of $6 million, implemented in cooperation with the Ministry of Employment and Vocational Training. So since its foundation in 2013, the Institute has continued to show outstanding results, which has led to the establishment of this triangular cooperation project to respond to the great demand by other African countries to use IFMIAC as a benchmark. So the triangular cooperation project will continue to be pursued at the ongoing construction of the Training Hub Center, where KOICA invested $6 million in order to cultivate the abilities and skills of the technical and vocational education and training trainers in neighboring countries. Next slide, please. In 2040, as you see here, KOICA has entered into a framework agreement on triangular cooperation with the Moroccan Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This framework was adopted in order to foster the dissemination of the successful Korean-Moroccan cooperation experiences to other African partner countries. And in the end of 2015, the Memorandum of Understanding for the establishment of a tripartite cooperation program in the field of vocational training among KOICA, the Ministry of National Education and Vocational Training, IFMIAC Casablanca, was signed alongside the first graduation of IFMIA with the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Trade, and 500 graduates' families in attendance. It's a quite meaningful achievement because the IFMIA, which KOICA supported, is used as a platform of tripartite cooperation for Francophone countries in Africa. Furthermore, it's a joint cooperation among not only the public subjects, but also private sector, such as the Moroccan Association for Automobile Industry and Commerce. Next slide, please. So here I'm going to talk about the 3 training program sessions that took place from 2018 to 2020. In the first session of 2018, 10 participants, policy makers and managers from Morocco, they benefited from triangular cooperation program in Korea Tech, based in Republic of Korea. The main objectives of this training was the sharing the knowledge and best practices on vocational training, organized and implemented by KOICA and the IFMIA, strengthening networks between the IFMIA Casablanca and recipient countries, as well as training public officers of the recipient countries working in the National Vocational Training Related Department. For the second session of 2019, 12 participants, policy makers and managers from Cameroon, Senegal, Ivory Coast, and Tunisia, they visited Morocco and they benefited from a training program organized in IFMIA Casablanca to share the successful public program partnership of IFMIA and also to introduce the vocational training policies and current situation of Morocco and Korea. Taking into consideration the COVID-19 pandemic, the third session of 2020 was online in favor of 17 Moroccan participants, trainers and lecturers in the field of automobile from IFMIA, and as well as 4 sub-participants from other African countries to build the capacity of vocational training in the field of automobile and to develop and implement an action plan for future courses. For the fourth and last session, who was supposed to take place at the end of 2020 for trainers and lecturers in the field of automobile, from African countries was unfortunately cancelled due to COVID-19 pandemic and also logistic issues of the recipient countries. So in general, for the time being, a total number of 43 participants were trained during the South-South Triangular Cooperation Program of KOICA Morocco office. Next slide, please. Regarding the issues and challenges faced, first of all, there was a lack of responsiveness of the vocational training department to KOICA official letters and the absence of smooth coordination. There was an unreachability of the government officials and participants, and the necessity to expand the deadlines and reschedule the program, etc. As governmental action, the ministry became more proactive, and they improved the communication chain with us. The second issue was the COVID-19 pandemic. The understaffing of the vocational training department and the FNIAC Institute during COVID-19 confinement caused a delay of appointment or nomination of beneficiaries. And as an action taken by the government, they encouraged remote work and video conferences as well as online training sessions starting from 2020. And the Moroccan government decided to introduce a mandatory vaccine pass to enter Morocco so that all recipient countries can come to our country and benefit from face-to-face trainings. And the last issue was the logistic issues of some African countries to perform online training courses due to the lack of necessary electronic equipment on their local institutes. For that, the VTD, here it's the Vocational Training Department, requested an exclusive request to the Moroccan Ministry of Foreign Affairs to exempt visa for Cameroonian participants so that they can benefit from face-to-face training. Next slide, please. As major achievements, we have 4 levels of achievement. In the international level, we got the recognition of the United Nations in the South-South Triangular Cooperation Best Practices for Sustainable Development in the report of 2020. For the regional level, there was development of a new support strategy model toward lower middle income countries, meaning scaling up of the existing KOICA's bilateral project into regional level to spread its achievements, and also suggestion of new strategy model toward the lower middle income countries like Morocco, where there is enough basic infrastructure and industrial environment. The second achievement in the regional level is the dissemination of project achievements and creation of synergies toward autogenous partnerships within bilateral cooperation projects, not only in the national level, but also in the regional level. For national level achievements, capacity building in organization and implementation of beneficiary agencies means the creation of an occasion for the Kingdom of Morocco to establish its autogenous partnership with some African countries, which can create synergies in a more sustainable way. For the institutional level, we developed an internal manual shared with all KOICA offices all over the world to share the KOICA Morocco experience. Next slide, please. So in general, all participants of our program appreciated this triangular cooperation experience, and it was an opportunity for them to discover new areas of the automobile industry of the Republic of Korea and Morocco, and the levels of academic achievements and satisfaction of the trainees were very high. For the 2018-2019 training courses, survey results by participants showed a satisfaction rate of 90 out of 100 on average. And the trainees from Morocco and the 4 countries have concluded developing action plans and analysis in their respective countries. And KOICA will conduct a follow-up survey and monitor the implementation of these action plans in their countries soon. Next slide, please. For the key lessons learned, first of all, the introduction of the model of a country at the same income level, which hired the possibility of adaptation and realization of training contents in the recipient countries. Selection of countries within the same background. Morocco and the recipient countries, they have the same level of infrastructure and automobile industry, as well as a similar education system, the French system, which allowed Korea to implement realistic training, easy to adapt directly in the African countries, and improve the capacity of absorbing knowledge, as well as reduce the logistic costs related to the translation fees, etc. Participants showed a high interest to the training program. They gained knowledge of the Korean automobile industry cases, and the last lesson learned is it was that we need to focus on the needs of the beneficiary countries and provide trainings. Those requirements are more likely to be implemented in their country. Because as you know, there is a big gap between the Republic of Korea and the recipient countries in terms of logistics, new technologies, infrastructure, etc., which makes the lessons learned from the Korean experience impossible to adapt in their country. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. So through this project, the opportunities among the participating countries have been enhanced to engage in self-motivated cooperation. As a result of this training, Morocco's IFMIA Casablanca and Senegal's Higher Institute of Vocational Education, ISEP, they established through KOICA's aid, they signed a partnership agreement to promote training exchange activities to strengthen the capabilities of instructors, ensuring the sustainability of the project. And thanks to this experience of tripartite cooperation, the FMIAC was able and capable to organize partnerships by themselves, and they share knowledge with other African countries. They were very proactive, and they participated reactively with stakeholders during the training sessions organized by KOICA. Next slide, please. No, previous slide, please. Recommendation. Yeah. So finally, what we highly recommend is to choose pivotal and beneficiary countries with similar background and knowledge. When we talk about background, we mean especially the same language background, since all participants from African countries use French to facilitate the communication and to ensure the efficient implementation in order to achieve the fruitful cooperation results. Then we encourage the pivotal country to regenerate the achievements and scale up from national level to regional level. And finally, support the pivotal country for autogenous partnerships with other countries. Next slide, please. So my presentation came to an end. Thank you for your attention and for inviting KOICA to this wonderful webinar. Please, should you have any inquiry, don't hesitate to contact me via email or for any further details. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Najoua, for that presentation. And I noted down, particularly what you said in terms of the needs of the beneficiary countries, one of the areas you had identified. And if I may, maybe I might just ask the question, to address that challenge, will you be sending out a survey, or how do you plan on addressing that, maybe to ensure that the program fits more with the needs of the beneficiary countries? And then one point also I found very interesting was the self-sustaining partnerships that you mentioned. You know, when the funding dries up, you've actually created a project that can continue on and is sustainable. So maybe if you could just elaborate on those two, and then we'll move to the closing.
Sure. Okay. So first of all, when we say that we need to focus on the need of the beneficiary countries, we need to do first a feasibility study of this training program, if it's going to work or not. As you said, we used to do some surveys, and when we get the results, according to this result, we can implement or not this training program. It depends on the requirements. It depends on the background of the countries and several other components. And for the second question, could you please more clarified?
Well, you had given the example about a technical vocational training center that had become self-sustaining. So I was just interested in these self-sustaining partnerships, but we don't have to go into too much detail because I think we're running out of time.
Yeah, I can give you much details after sending me an email. That would be better.
No problem.
Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. May I invite all the speakers and our organizers who are still here to turn on the camera so we could. I just have one question for Mr. Rabotapi. You mentioned about the regional cooperation and the partnership and the South-South learning with the neighboring countries. If you could just let us know how initiatives like the one that we organized today could better align with those initiatives that are initiated at country level. Mr. Rabotapi, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So the question is how the webinars that we arranged with our regional partners, how they can align with
the activities that we organize at global level, because these are very interesting initiatives, and we want to build on that and to complement that as much as we can.
Yeah, okay. Firstly, let me say that the intention of the webinars with the different countries was firstly to understand how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected them as countries, and to what extent have their schooling systems been affected. And then secondly, to understand what interventions have they put in place, and also to understand if there are any areas of cooperation that we could identify that as countries we then can pursue. I think that was the main objective of the webinars. And of course, like it is apparent today, it became clear that in many of the areas that were highlighted in the various webinars, that issues were very much similar. And I think even from the reports that are coming, that we have received today, it's clear that there's a lot of similarities in terms of how we were affected and how largely we have responded to the pandemic itself. Now, in terms of how these interventions are going to align with other global interventions, clearly, I think that it is out of sharing of these experiences and out of consolidation of these experiences and alignment of interventions that we can be able to also align with the global interventions. I think in one of my slides, I also made the reference to the UNESCO knowledge sharing platform that has been developed through the assistance of the Teacher Task Force for Education 2030. So the issue of a sharing of best practices and dissemination of innovations and knowledge is one of the objectives that we had set ourselves as part of the task force. So these regional engagements with a view to learn experiences is part and parcel of that broader agenda of engaging at the regional level and finding regional solutions Of course, taking guidance from some of the guidelines that are developed internationally, because we do take cognizance of the fact that countries of the West, may be advanced in some of these interventions. But we also have to make sure that these interventions are customized to suit our different contexts. And that issue, as a region, our context is the same. So therefore, bringing alignment to interventions is going to make sure that regional integration, regional mobility, regional exchange of knowledge, of competencies happens much easier if there's more collaboration and if there's more alignment in terms of how we deal with issues and in terms of how we respond to challenges. I'm not sure if I have answered your question.
You did. Thank you so much. And by way of moving now, Claire, as you mentioned, to our closing, we will definitely follow up with our speakers also, especially with the regional initiatives, and make sure that the global work that we are supporting are aligned with the regional priorities. And that would be very, very important. There are many more questions, but we don't have time for that. But we look forward to our continued collaboration, and especially in the context of the partnership that we are trying to build at global level between UNICEF and UNESCO, in partnership with our colleagues in the socialprotection.org in the International Policy Center for Inclusive Growth. So from my side, Claire, I just want to thank all our speakers and our colleagues from socialprotection.org and the colleagues in UNICEF and UNESCO who were part of the organization of this webinar. Over to you, Claire, for the final remarks.
Yes, thank you very much, Marta. It's been a pleasure working with UNICEF and socialprotection.org, and I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their very interesting presentations, which we have, of course, recorded, and we will aim to make them available also on our respective websites, but also on the South-South Cooperation Galaxy platform. And I just wanted to say that I think that's, the focus also really on sharing of solutions on distance learning platforms, I think is quite interesting. And I think that that we can do a lot in terms of bringing up this knowledge sharing, but also in terms of the technical cooperation that can be pursued through South-South, and triangular cooperation also as mentioned by the colleague working on the KOICA Morocco triangular cooperation TVET program. I think there's also a lot to be done, and I think we can also explore that in terms of ensuring synergies among a number of the different programs in education. As we mentioned, there's a lot going on in ICT education and a lot of innovation that I think that we can draw on for South-South cooperation. So with that, I'd just like to thank everybody again, and we'll surely be in touch to try to gather more information. We've got a rich resource already from your presentations. But as we move forward, perhaps thinking about a South-South publication. So thanks again.
Thank you, colleagues, and thank you to all the participants. Please do the survey when you leave, as you leave the webinar. This will help us in improving webinars in the future. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.